Okay, and you look at the Hebrew words here, I'm not going to read all that, but they understand the Hebrew words here that when these trees were transplanted, that the seeds were so large and then God made it happen that the normal means that on the third day of the earth, the cycle, how a tree would grow through its cycles and years and all that, and seasons, that the word implies that this was instantaneous growth, that the moment that God transplanted the seeds from the heavenly garden into the soil of the earthly garden, that they grew instantly and produced fruit instantly. And the tree of life also was transplanted. So in other words, there's this connection with, in the spiritual Garden of Eden, tree of life, and that's transplanted and connected to the soil, the dirt of the earth that God created in the physical plane that you and I live in. You ever heard anything like that before? It's pretty deep, isn't it? But this is not my opinion. This is based on ancient Hebraic Jewish understanding of the Scriptures, and there's nothing in here that these teachings go way back before the time of Jesus and Christianity and all that. It has nothing to do with that debate. You know, a lot of times you have to go back and filter a lot of things from the Christian side and the rabbinic side because there's this bias on both sides to go at the other as being wrong, and then they throw things in there to try to change the view of the other side. So let's look at what we have here. God planted the garden eastward or prior to the heavenly garden to actual creation that we see of the physical world. Trees were created on the third day. Adam was created on the sixth day. And then God transplanted the tree of life from the heavenly that was created before into the earth, which is in the physical realm. Now, let's see if we can follow some of this. You know the story. Adam and Eve, they do what you and I would have done. I don't think there's anybody here who would have said that they wouldn't have ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil when the serpent came. I mean, they were perfect, right? And is anybody here perfect? Okay, so we would have done the same thing. Okay? But, you know, they failed, and God kicked them out of the garden, and he put cherubim, you say cherubim, it's cherubim in Hebrew, they're angels, and a sword, flaming sword, to keep the way of the tree of life. They were kicked out from the Garden of Eden to prevent them from reaching out and partaking of the tree of life. Now, we're going to get into that in a little bit. But focus on the cherubim on the east. This is actual directional. The east of the garden, angels protecting the flaming sword on the east of the garden. That's important. And they are to keep the way of the tree of life. Now, when you look at that, do you think that's negative? Your first thought is going to say that sounds negative. Okay. Actually, I'm going to show you a little bit later, this was the most gracious thing that God ever did to humanity. And I'll show you that. It'll make sense to you. All right. And we look at that east part. Now, a little bit later, you know, now they're in the earth, not in the garden. Adam and Eve have two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, right? There's a mark put on him. Cain goes out. He goes to the land of Nod. Now, there's a lot of theories where this is. Nobody really knows where Nod is. But it was on the east of Eden. Okay? So it's east of Eden. And then his son, Enoch, this is not the Enoch that we hear about that was translated. This is the other line. He built a city. Now, you and I know the archaeological record before the flood and after the flood very clearly has established that the civilization of man began in the Fertile Crescent called Mesopotamia, where the Euphrates and Tigris was when I showed you that map before. That's where man really branched out. Before the flood, the Sumerians, and then you have the Babylonians, the Chaldeans afterwards, and that is the catalyst. And even Jericho, even up towards where Israel is today, to Jericho is one of the oldest known cities in the world. Okay? These are attested to in archaeological record. There's no, and history. There's no issues with that. So, but notice, wherever the land of Nod is, it was east of Eden. And if he's the precursor of the city life, that we expect this to be in that vicinity, in that area, okay, of where we would consider the Fertile Crescent. All right. And I just talked about that archaeological evidence. Now, if you look at Israel is over here. Now, let's make the assumption that Jerusalem is related to the Garden of Eden. And Mesopotamia is over here. The Tigris and the Euphrates River, you can't really see it up there. Cain went to the east of Eden, and he's over here. Wouldn't the garden be west of where civilization started? By the biblical record?
Yeah.
If this is where civilization began, that we have a record of, which is established, and Cain came out and his son Enoch built the first city, and they were pushing this way, and they were east of Eden, it says. Would not, wherever Eden was, wherever the garden was, be west of where they were dwelling, wherever it is in here?
Absolutely.
So why do they choose that over here as the spot of the Garden of Eden? Because it's based on one thing. It's based on the Euphrates River. And you can't just base it. And by the way, the Hebrew word for Euphrates River is parat, which we'll show you in a little bit. And it might not necessarily mean that Euphrates. Okay? Okay, so that's an assumption that the parat is the Euphrates talking about in Genesis 1. We'll talk about this. I can jump ahead here, but okay, let's go back to Genesis again. Boy, we're getting a lesson in the creation. Is it a whole new creation story? Okay. All right. Back on the third day. This also happened on the third day. Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so, and he called the dry land earth, and the waters he called seas. And in 2 and 6 we get a little synopsis of detail. It says that there went a mist up from the earth and watered the face of the ground. So on the earth, there was only one landmass, and the rest was water. The continents came later, through earthquakes, through the upheavals, through the flood, whatever, a bunch of things over the history of time. But at this point on the third day, it was all water, right? And read Genesis 1 and 2 and all that. It was all water, face of the waters and all that. Now he separated the waters from the earth. The dry land was called earth, and then what was left was the water. So you have one landmass, and the rest is water. Okay? There's no rivers. Rivers come because of climate changes and because of elevation changes and because of earthquakes, things that had not happened when the earth was just created. It was closer to its perfection back then. And it's got ever worse after, okay? There is no rivers. Water, one place, land in another place. Okay, that's very important. Now we come to Genesis 2, 10 and 14. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden. And from thence, from the garden, it was parted and became into 4 heads. The Hebrew word is ra'ashim. It does not mean rivers. It means heads, like a fountainhead coming up from underground. We're going to talk about that. And this is a problem when you have Western mindsets that don't understand the Hebrew language. They read that and they're saying the name of the first, the Paishan, the Gihon, the Hiddekel, and the Euphrates, which is actually Parat in Hebrew. It's Hiddekel, Gihon, and Paishan are actual Hebrew words, but the Euphrates is put in there as an assumption, but the Hebrew word is Parat. Okay? So these are not considered rivers in the sense of where they would come out and be rivers. They're considered coming from these 4 heads. And you know, anything about head pressure, how things come up out of the ground. And I'll show you what the rabbi said about that. But we're going to be coming back and back to the river went out of Eden. It didn't come out of the garden first. It went from Eden to water the garden. Now remember, all the vegetation was already watered on the earth by the mist of the ground. But this is unique. This is the Garden of Eden. Okay? There's a river. Now remember, let's see if that's the best slide I could find for the river going through.